Welcome to Systemize Your Success. Today, I'm joined by Julie Wilkinson, who is a keynote speaker and someone who is an expert in mergers and acquisitions. She has her own podcast, which is the Build and Exit podcast, and also a YouTube channel to note as well. And today, we're going to be diving into all things mergers, acquisitions, and how to basically grow your company through alternative means, which I know many small business owners may not think is relevant for them in the early stages, but I think today we're going to be finding out when is the right time to start thinking about this. And actually, having just spoken to Julie beforehand, maybe actually we should start thinking a lot earlier than we may actually plan at the moment.
So the question is this: how do entrepreneurs like us, who don't have an endless supply of cash, how do we leverage the best apps, virtual assistants, automation tools and systems to scale our businesses, increase our profits, and have more time to do what we love to do each day? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name's Dr. Steve Day, and this is Systemize Your Success.
So, Julie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me. So obviously you have a lot of experience in mergers acquisitions. Just give us a bit of a background of how you've ended up doing what you do. There's a 2-minute history of your background and what type of clients you work with and how you help them.
Yeah, so I'm a chartered management accountant by trade. I came from corporate, so I had 20 years in working in finance departments in corporate. Obviously lots of different jobs, different levels. And the reason I started my company, so Wilkinson Accounting Solutions, is because I did a survey and I asked 20 businesses what their accountants did for them, and 100% only saw their accounts once a year. So I realised after a bit of investigation that there is a gap there for SMEs, where I think not enough SMEs bring in a bit of corporate structure. As corporate structure, obviously I'm not saying it has to be as complex as a big multi-corporate. However, elements of it, especially sort of governance and controls, does really help a business grow, especially if you want to exit that business. So that was the reason for starting Wilkinson's Accounting. We do have 2 areas. So we have our tax and bookkeeping team, and then we have our sort of CFO and consultancy team. And our area of specialism within that team is M&A and exit planning. Typical, our sweet spot size clients is probably between sort of 1 million and 20 million turnover. But I'd say most deals in the market tend to be around somewhere between sort of 2 to 6 million. That seems to be like the sweet spot of ones being sold. And our services sort of cover everything from exit planning. So we help people implement controls and functions so that they can exit their business. We do valuation reports, sellers packs and pitch decks for funding. We help with full due diligence for buyers, and we have post-integration strategies as well, where we help people implement robust infrastructure for them to be able to get good reporting in real time.
Okay, fantastic. And so if thinking about from the perspective of someone like myself, I'm a business owner. I've been going now for a few years, and I've spoken to mentors, and they've often talked about growth by mergers. And to one of the early examples, even before I started this business, one of my mentors back then, a guy called Rob Moore, like I know in his early days, he grew very quickly by actually buying other companies to in effect get their list. And so when should someone think about that type of strategy for growth? And is there any situations that you see that doesn't make sense, or that it's too early, or is that just the right thing for every company? We should all be thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a right time. I mean, ultimately, I said before we started, me personally, one thing I've learned from doing a lot of M&A is I would probably never start a business organically again. The fact is, organic growth is hard work. And in a way, you're kind of reinventing the wheel of what someone's already built. Whether is everybody right for it? I suppose when a seller's trying to sell to you, they do want to see some background of business, entrepreneurial shit that you've got to run that business after acquisition. There's a lot of courses out there that sort of just talk about no money down deals. And I think it is enticing a lot of sort of non-business owners or people that want to go into it thinking they can buy businesses, which doesn't mean they can't, but obviously they do have to run these businesses after acquisition. So I don't think there's a right time. I even think probably people going into business, if they've got good experience, could possibly just do it as their first transaction, as long as they get the right help and support and they've got the right investment along the way. how we normally work with people is it just depends on the growth strategy. I believe everybody should have an exit plan. And I think people should be thinking of their exit plan from the moment they start their business. I never think you're too small for planning and reporting, which and by reporting, I don't mean complicated 100-page reports. I just mean basic KPIs, P&Ls and regular bookkeeping, because they're ultimately the foundations of your business. I think not enough people plan their exit. And so when we say exit, it doesn't have to be full-time exit. It could just be you want other income streams. And to do that, you need time. But to get time back, you need to get rid of the doing in the business. So that means you've got to be able to relieve tasks to other people. Now, that is a plan. That is an exit plan, because you are exiting some form of your business. And I think I believe people should be doing that right from the start. So when we say when is acquisitions a good time, if you're going to plan, that would include a financial plan. And I would say most people should go at least top level 3 to 5 years out to think about what's their personal goals from their business. And if you can't get to that personal goal organically through your current business model or your business plan, if it's a new business, then that's when you would be thinking, I need to do something different. And that would be where acquisition would come in, because typically you would acquire to accelerate growth.
Yeah, of course. So like the example before is to build your list from a small business terminology, if you like. So actually get more clients instantaneously rather than having to spend months and years and many, many years sometimes, just slowly, as you say, organically building up your list and getting yourself out there on social media and allowing people to come towards you, whether that's through paid advertising or other. It's still a huge amount of work. And I know from doing it myself for many years and know that it's not an easy thing to do. One of the things that's always put me off about doing something like buying another competitor or someone in a similar market to be able to get a list or to grow my audience in that way is the finance side of stuff, and not feeling like I have access to funds that would be needed to do that. And that may be right, but I mean my company's doing pretty good, but I just don't know how, like from a cash point of view, I don't have £1 million sat in the bank. And you're talking about buying companies 1 million, 2 million, but I'm sure that's a lot. I'm sure it's done differently, as in you don't need £1 million in the bank to buy £1 million company. So how would someone like me look at this as an opportunity? Like, is there a way you can leverage your existing business and the value of that in order to raise finance to buy a company, or is it always going to be about getting other outside investment?
Well, I mean, ultimately it depends what other plans you have for the cash, because most people will be able to get investment for a deal, but you do just have to have a good business plan and cash flow to support what you're trying to acquire. If somebody has a business now and they want to know, can I afford to acquire another business? The first place you should start is building your own cash flow in your own business. Because this is where we talk about, because what you want to do is see, why are you buying it? That's the most important thing. It's not just about buying it. And it's not only for customer lists. People might buy it to get access to employees, so resource, technology, maybe a different market source. So maybe it's part of your supply chain or something. So I don't know, let's just say, maybe you're a personal trainer. You might think, I could go and buy a gym now, a building to have a gym and a personal training. It'll give you access to new markets. And I suppose what you need to do is build your own business plan to see what cash flow have you got available, to then know, well, where is my investment? Because most people will need investment for an acquisition. It wouldn't be sensible to put all your money in, because you'd get some form of funding. And often people will get seller financing, and that means that what you typically do on an acquisition is you have a deal structure. So you'll say, right, I'm going to pay 40% upfront. So that 40% needs funding. And then you're going to pay the balance, which we call seller financing, which is paid to the seller over a period of sort of however many years, 2 to 5 years. So obviously, the longer you can push, the better negotiations you have, the easier it is to pay it off. So what most people would do is get funding for the upfront or put their own money in, and then try and utilize the cash flow of that business combined with their own business to then pay the deferrals back. But what I would say is it's really important to have those cash flows, because a lot of these courses that teach people acquisitions talk a lot about no money down deals, because theoretically you can buy a business with no money. But what that doesn't tell people is the stress it can put on that business after acquisition, because if that business you're buying hasn't paid those loans back previously, it is going to be a cash restraint. It's not impossible, it can be managed. but it can't be managed if you don't have any of the reporting in place after the acquisition, which you're going to want pretty quickly. So I think, I feel any size business could theoretically grow by acquisition, because you don't have to buy £1 million business. I did an acquisition this year and it wasn't 1 million. I bought 100 clients off a retiring firm, but it still doubled my business at that point. So I was only 2.5 years in my business. So, and I think anybody can buy. The reason people tend to go for bigger deals is because actually funding is easier to get in bigger installments. But it's not impossible. And a lot of people fear the risk, I think, element of it. Because once you get funding, it can be quite scary to think, oh my God, I owe this money. But in the end, that depends what level of risk you're willing to take. Running a business is relatively risky, I think, in general. And it depends how risk averse you are to whether you want the funding or you don't to grow by that acquisition.
Yeah, totally. I mean, most of us have probably got mortgages, so we're probably actually used to bigger debts than we actually think. Because at the end of the day, when you buy your first house, you typically lie on all the forms in order to bump up your income in order to get the mortgage to be able to actually afford the house that your dream house or whatever. Or I say lie, I say, yeah, maybe you're just creative with the truth, because obviously you don't lie on forms like that, but you know what I mean. And so I think that, like, generally speaking, business owners are quite good at risk take or risk coping with risk. Because like you say, just running a business in itself and coming out of if you've got a steady job, like I did when I started this business, I came out of being a doctor into running a business, and most people, including my parents, thought I was completely crazy because I was just giving up a security of a career, a vocation for something that was just a pipe dream. So I think I imagine that many people are quite okay with risk, but I guess it's just managing that risk and not over leveraging yourself. And the same, I've been in property for 20 years, and it's always been the case of you see people going bankrupt when mortgage rates go up. It's because they've got 95, 100, 110% mortgages. So I think it's being sensible about it, isn't it, and not over leveraging in order to do something which you're not actually sure is going to work or not.
And I think it's just about planning.
Yeah.
There's a lot of buyers. I find it a bit ironic. There's a lot of buyers that are going into acquisitions sort of complaining that the seller doesn't have the right information yet. They don't have it in their own business. I personally don't think people are ready to go for acquisitions if they don't have their own books in order. And by that, I mean, if you're only seeing your accounts once a year, you haven't got your books in order, because you can't possibly know your real-time cash flow if you're only seeing it once a year. So I would say the first thing you should do is get sort of support with your own business models, get your own cash flows in place, get your own bookkeeping up to date, get your own sort of basic management accounts, because how do you implement it into something else if you don't even know how to do it in your own business? And the likelihood is where sellers are at the minute, they don't typically have that in place. People sometimes say, oh, because they're big, they don't. Actually, the bigger they get, the worse they get, because often they haven't planned it themselves. So you've got to know what you need in place to run that business after acquisition. So that's what I would say. As long as you're prepared, then you're probably okay. But if you're not prepared, it is a big risk, because what will happen is you'll get in there and then you'll just be bombarded with other problems from the acquisition. You just won't have time or the right cash or resource to implement things.
Yeah, totally. And if you look at it from the flip side, because obviously we talked a lot about if you want to buy a company, but what about if you wanted to exit? So say for me, if I said, come to you as a client, I said, look, I really want out of my business 12 months, 24 months from now, whatever the timeline is. What are the key things that I need to put in place, whether that's team, that's systems? You've already mentioned obviously the reporting and the accounting, that side of stuff, but what else is there that's important to be able to actually find a buyer, but also really get a decent valuation for my company when I do choose to exit?
Yeah, so the thing with selling a business is it's not like selling a house. And the problem is people see other people in the industry that have sold their business and they just think because their business is a similar turnover, it's worth the same. It's just not like that, because it all comes down to the operations. Ultimately, there is a historic calculation. There is a calculation on the valuation because someone's had 3 years set of accounts, but a buyer is buying the future. They're not buying the past. So you're calculating on the past, but they've got to see a benefit to the future. That benefit comes from how poorly or good, how good or poorly operated is that business. And what a lot of people fail to see is because they have what I would call a lifestyle business. So they've taken a lot of cash out and they've earned a lot. The fact is nobody wants to buy a job. So if after you pay yourself, if you work in it as the owner, and then after you pay yourself, there is no money left, it's typically not worth that much to an investor, because an investor wants to pay you and get a return for themselves. So what I would say is it's sort of process, systems and controls really, and people are the four main things. And obviously within that you get all the departments, so you get HR, finance, because the first thing you need to know is, do you have decision makers? Because if you want to sell it for maximum value, as the person owning it, you've got to be able to transition yourself from a doer to more of an investor mindset. And to do that is quite a lot of work, because one, you have to have the right processes in place to trust that other people will do those roles. You've got to have the cash to be able to afford to pay those people. You've got to be able to have the systems that they can follow and the process to be able to do those roles accurately. And ultimately, you've got to have the trust that that business works. So that's where, when I say corporate governance, that is what I mean. I see corporate governance as being safeguarding that business from risks of those processes and transactions. And that's what I think. And so there's lots of things then that go into it. It's, well, do you have a management team that can make decisions? If you don't, you're probably going to need them. When do you need them? You need a financial plan. This is why a lot of it always comes back to finance, because a lot of it comes down to, do I have the cash and can I afford to do these things? Because ultimately, in the end, if the business has no money, it's not a business. So that's the thing. So if you haven't got the management team, you need to plan when you're going to get them. Then you need to know, because what a lot of people do is they grow. This is what I see. They grow, and actually maybe they've got to 6 staff or something relatively quickly, and they actually feel themselves more busy and sinking more, which theoretically that shouldn't be true, because when you get staff, they should be helping you. But what typically happens is, because they haven't implemented any processes or controls earlier on, these employees are kind of not doing whatever they want. But what typically happens is the owner's often stepping in and fixing problems because he hasn't got the process to stop the problem in the first place. And I do find business owners feel more busy because they now feel they have to fix a lot of problems and they have these staff to manage. So the earlier on in the process you can sort it, the better, really, because theoretically from day one, when you get your first employee, you want to make sure you've got those processes and systems in place. Because what you want to think in your mind is, if I'm going to replicate this on a larger scale, how do I do that systematically? And so a lot of people won't do that. They'll just grow quickly because they're too busy and they get to a big extent. I sometimes think maybe slowing down the growth and doing it properly is sometimes better than growing too quick and letting it get out of control. And that is why then people do acquisitions, because the fact is most people get to a certain stage in their business growth where they can't grow that much more organically, purely because of cash flow. Because normally to grow to a significant level, you have to invest in overheads first. Like, you need people, the processes and the systems, before you can get the customers to do it. And that can be hard. That can be restricted to get working capital for that. So if that's why people then would do an acquisition, because they would buy that resource, they would buy the cash and they would buy the customers, and that would allow them to move past that growth. They'd get to a point where they're stuck, and that would allow them to get past that phase. That phase, I think, is probably around 250,000 turnover, realistically.
Okay.
Between 250 and 500,000 is, I think, where people have that struggle to start flipping past it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can resonate with quite a lot of things you're saying, but also a lot of what you're saying is music to my ears, because I'm a massive believer in systems, hence the reason I actually help and coach small business owners on doing exactly what you just said. So I promised my listeners I didn't pay you to say any of that. And because one of the things that I really struggle with, I've had 2 failed businesses over the years, and then this time coming back into business after being in a career in medicine, I decided to do it differently, and to actually start from day one. And literally the first thing I did, and I've got a degree in computing and systems analysis and design, so I sort of knew this stuff, but I'd never really applied it to my own business. And then this time round is like literally from day one, every single thing I did, I probably went a bit over the top, to be honest, but every single thing I did was documented and everything was systemized. And then as over the years, we developed more and more complex or sophisticated ways of creating those systems earlier on, so that actually we can remove ourselves from a lot of the managerial decisions. When I'm talking before you get a C-suite in, before you sort of are able to afford to hire real decision makers, but just so you're not dragged into every decision. The decisions are always systemized for you to as much extent as you can. So I love this. And I love the fact that is actually you see that's a very important part of whether it's growth or exit, both have the same, the same mechanism to get there, I guess. So yeah.
I honestly think the process of control, the people, systems, process, and controls are the four most fundamental things for business growth but success. Because the fact is, like, one of the examples we always use. So when we help people with an exit plan, one of the things we would do is help make the company become financially literate. And by that, I mean, what typically happens is the owner will go off and build their own sort of business plan, whether it be on paper or in their head. And no one's ever really bought into that process. That can be external consult freelancers working for you, or it can be employed staff. It doesn't really matter which ones. They go off and then they put it in a drawer and they don't really analyze it. And then time just moves on. And, by the time they know, the next year's come round. And the problem with this is there's no accountability in the business. People aren't being accountable. So we would say the first thing I would suggest you're doing is you bring people into those budgeting processes with you. Now, it can be on a small scale. So, for instance, if you've got an administrator, why not let them have £100 spend a month? They can make decisions to spend up to £100 a month, which you don't have to sign off, like give them a card or something. Yeah, that takes a bit of control, because theoretically, yes, they could go off and spend more. But if you've got a good bookkeeping process, you would know that even if they did it once, you would know it quickly, and you could choose then to reprimand that, or reprimand's wrong, but you could choose to challenge that person. So this is where you need the process and the control, because the process is, so I don't have to make every decision. I'm letting that person spend £100 without my authority. But if that person goes outside of that control and they go and spend more, how do I find out? And it's that how do I find out that I think a lot of people worry about, because they're like, well, what if they make a really big problem? But at the end of the day, if you don't have the process at the end, the control, then you won't find out. As long as you've got the control, and the control in this instance would be your bookkeeping process. Whoever, make sure you're getting at least our monthly management accounts, so that you can check against those budget lines, wherever you code it to. Let's just say stationery, check the stationery. If your stationery bill's £500 in a month, then it's pretty obvious they've probably gone over it. If it's £50 in the month, it's likely they've stuck to it. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I think is the most important thing. It's that control piece around it.
Yeah, totally. No, I love this. One of the things that we talk to our clients about is well, it's all about letting go. It's about letting go of control, and whether it's finances or emails or whatever. And the biggest barriers are always in that fear. What if they went off with all my money? It's like, really? How are they going to do that? And it's about just often just actually rationalizing, and like you say, not giving them your Visa card with the PIN number, with no spending limit. So there's so many ways now you can get, like through banking apps. You can have charge cards with limits on. You can have every single transaction pinging to your Slack account. Like, there's so many ways you can actually really easily monitor stuff like that to redeem a bit of control. And like, one of the things that comes up, has come up with us a couple of times, is we use a simple spreadsheet method for actually logging people's time. So it's basically an invoice that our contractor sends.
Well. Yeah.
And one of the things I love about that is we use Google, which has this infinite version history. And so we can see every single tiny change on that spreadsheet. We can then actually see when was that made, who made it. And it's all tracked back, and through Google accounts, you can see their MAC address and their location. Like, it's super, super easy to actually get a full audit trail automatically. You don't have to think about this stuff. All you need is someone to actually then go and periodically review that to say, look, are there any discrepancies that we need to look into further? And if not, then you're all good. So yeah, no, I love it.
Yeah.
Anything else I wanted to say on that before I move on?
No, not really. It's just I think it is quite overwhelming for people sometimes, because there is so much in a business that you have to do. And I think I do think the fundamentals start with planning, because you have to plan these things to know what do you want to relieve, when are you going to do that, do you have the cash flow to sustain that, and how then do you grow from it. They're sort of like the four things in my mind. So there's the plan, and then there's the action. And I just think so many businesses are so busy all the time, they don't take that time away to actually reflect, which is why I think it's better to do it earlier on, even from the point of startup. If you're thinking about these things when you start, you're going to be in a much better place than if you don't think about it until a year or 2 years in.
Yeah, totally. And I hold my hands up. I totally wish I had some sort of business plan in the beginning. It was literally just, oh, this seems like a good idea. I'll stick myself on social media and see what bites. And a few people said, oh, yeah, I'd like to learn what what you're talking about, Steve. And that was when the business started. And it was really, for me, it was a passion business, getting out of doing something that I felt very trapped by, working in a hospital. And so that is literally as much planning that went into the early stage, and it definitely came back to bite me.
Yeah.
We had real hiccup after about 2.5 years, with business partners and finances, and I think most of that would have been avoided had we actually put some planning in place, even quite loosely. But we were just sort of winging it a bit, and I think lots of business owners do. And I think that, the lessons learned and going back, and so thinking about that. I know, again, before we started actually recording, we were talking about you having come from a corporate background and then starting your own business, and that transition. And you said there's things you would do differently now if you were doing it all again. Can you remember what you were talking about?
Yeah, well, I think I would probably more buy into something.
Yeah.
I suppose I came from I have always had a plan. I'm not going to sit here and say, I mean, I probably am a bit of a risk taker. So I have grown a bit quickly, not with every process in place. So I'm not sitting here and saying everybody has to have 100% processes in place. I think you need to structure it based on your own capabilities and mindset, because it's all down to what you can cope with at the end of the day. When I started, I don't think you ever have a definitive plan, because ultimately, as a small business, things will be changing all the time. So it's not about not being flexible. And I don't think there's any harm in sort of posting on LinkedIn and seeing where it goes to a point. But I think there's also, though, people need so much income to live. And what I find happens is if they don't give themselves a goal, they'll let people come to them and take on anything, and they get overworked very quickly because they don't charge enough. And a lot of people go, well, I have to do that because I'm starting out. That's not true. I didn't. When I started out, I turned quite a lot of work down right from there. But that was one of the things I think I did quite well, because I always knew where I wanted to go as a vision, and I did stick to that plan. I think probably I would have bought a client base sooner if I'd really thought about it when I said that's what I would have changed. But I think I did that quite well. But I think, if you just rush into it and don't think about these things, and you do just go out and take anyone, that's fair enough. But when you take it, audit it, have a look at it. Is it the right customer for you? Did it work? Did it not work? I just think people go out and just take so much right at the beginning. They don't then have time to reflect if it's right. So I think you have to be fluid as a business owner, because you have to be able to diversify and change. But I don't think the end goal should change. If you know in your heart, I want to deliver this type of service, don't fluctuate from that overall goal. Maybe the type of people you work with might change because you might pick the wrong person, and that's fine. But you've got, if you don't ever analyze it, you don't know it. And the analytical bit does come from reporting and information, which is why when business owners start, a lot of people say I'm too small to have a KPI report or not. But are you? Because even if it is just you as the business owner, surely you want to track, are you doing it right? So like I say, I'm not talking about a 50-page report. I'm just talking about basic reports that test you, what do you make per customer? What's your profit by customer? What's your cash flow like? And then maybe some of your other KPIs, like, what's your percentage close rate of customers? What leads are you getting in? There are obviously some non-financial KPIs that would go into that, but they should be all relatively easy to track, especially as a small business. So if you haven't got them in, that's not because you haven't got time. It's just because you haven't sat back to actually thought about the analytical side of the business.
Yeah, no, I can resonate with a lot of that, and having not done that in the early stages, but then it becomes incredibly challenging, I think, to bring in staff. So when you want to bring in, say, easy example would be a salesperson, after you've got a basic admin coverage and customer service, and that's probably one of the next people that you would consider hiring. And if you don't know what your own close rates are, what your own success rates from converting leads into sales is, then how do you then judge the performance of somebody else? And it's just simple things like that, and whether it's all the time taken to do activities. Like, one of the things that I'm massively keen on is actually timekeeping, but it's not about being micromanaging and saying and watching over what every minute everyone's doing and say, oh, were you on Facebook during that? It's like nothing to do with that. It's about, okay, if we know that on average these activities take this long, then I can work out the capacity of someone's, what they can take on, but then I can also compare them with somebody else. And otherwise, you don't know if someone's doing work in inverted commas and they put down, I've done 10 hours of work, but there's no indication of what that work was. There's no way to compare anything. And so, yeah, really simple. We've done some things well. I think, from speaking to you today, I think there's a lot of things we could probably improve on. But I think certain things we seem to have done fairly well up until now, and which is always good to know I'm sort of on the right track.
And I don't think there's any point in punishing yourself. Look, we all make mistakes. I'm not going to sit here and say that my business is perfect. We don't have everything in place. And I don't really think a small business ever will. But I think what's important is you have enough in place to make it at least sustainable, because, for yourself, sometimes the business can succeed without these things. I have seen businesses grow without these things in place, but there will just come a time when it can't go any further. And then I see there's a lot of stress and worry about cash flow. And I think, why do people want to put that on their shoulders? If they just think about these things early doors and have a bit of a plan, it will just become easier for you later down the line. But then again, if you are down that line and you're now at the place where you haven't done that and you're here, well, if you are where you are, that is where you are now. But that doesn't mean you can't implement it. But theoretically, you should have more cash flow to bring in more support to help you. Get the right team members and that might mean you have to invest in some consultants to help you do it.
Yeah, totally. Fantastic. It's been a very interesting and useful conversation, and I knew it would be when we started, when we got to or touched base about potentially coming on the show. So I'm very glad that you came along. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure other people listening will too. I'm going to wrap this one up, but I do have some questions that I'd like to ask you, if you wouldn't mind. And I ask everybody these questions towards the end of our podcast. But before I do, is there anything else you wanted to add or say or bring to the table before I wrap things up?
No, just thanks for having me.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. And thank you for coming along. Okay, so what are your 2 or 3 favorite apps or bits of software that you use in your business?
What am I allowed to say names? Well, we use we have Outlook, and Teams, because we're fully virtual, so we don't have an office.
Yep.
Sort of like Outlook and Teams are really good for us, because that allows us, because we have like a shared drive, so we can all access the same drives. And then for us, it will be we have a HR software tool that allows people to put expenses and book holiday online. That's been really good because it allows us to track and monitor.
What's that one?
I can't remember what the name
don't worry.
Breathe, I think it is.
Breathe.
Breathe.
Yeah, Breathe. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Breathe. Yeah. I mean, we just have a basic one. It's only like £5 a month.
Yeah.
And then our systems like QuickBooks, Xero, and tax systems are obviously for us one of the most important things. And we have like online money laundering tools and things like that, so we can do all our checks. So they sort of systems for us.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking before about businesses and having P&Ls and cash flows and things, and I guess cash flow doesn't really come into Xero so much, projected cash flow, but having Xero in not having Xero in my business, I just don't know how I'd function now. Like for many years I didn't. I had spreadsheets and I used to give a box of receipts to my accountant once a year. Like you said, I was that guy, going back 20 odd years, and then we switched over to Xero, and it's just like, why wouldn't people do this? It's like it just makes everything so much. It doesn't have to be Xero, QuickBooks, whatever. I used to on Sage. I used originally, but it was overly complicated, I thought, for my size of business. But anyway, but yeah. So absolutely, I love Xero. I think it's one of those tools which I just can't fathom how I would actually now run a business and have any idea what was going on without it. Anyway, I digress. The title of this podcast is Systemize Your Success, but what does success mean to you?
For me, it's about getting multiple income streams, living the lifestyle that I want. So I don't see retiring or exiting a business as retiring, because I don't see retiring as meaning you never have to work again. For me, my mindset of retiring is for me to be able to get income from what I love doing for as little time as possible for the maximum value, to then enjoy my lifestyle with my friends and family. That's what I see. And what I think happens a lot is people just think, if I start my business, I get out of the slog, which to a point, yes, because you're not controlled by somebody else. But what often people do is they just replace their corporate job or whatever their job is with their self-employed job. And that, and it is hard. I'm not going to lie. It is a lot. It takes time to transition from having a job to having a business, to having that business as an asset. But if that's what you want, if you want your lifestyle to be that, because what most people say is, a lot of people say, oh, I need the money. But from my research, people don't want money. What they actually want is time. But the problem is, to get time, most people have to get so much income first before they can have that time, because you need to earn money. So it's that sort of transition from, if you're going into your own business, it's that transition from, isn't it? Well, do I want to work in this business full time? Maybe at first you do, if you really love it. But the fact is at some point in time, someone will have to exit their business, either through illness or through retirement. Now, that might be in your mind, God, that's 30 years away, but time goes quick, and also feelings change. And what I see a lot is people will just fall out of love with their business, and then they're not in a position they can sell. So I just think whatever business you're in, it's always good to have an exit in mind and think about what that exit looks like to you as a person, which is what money do you need personally? Do you have other investment income streams, like through investments and things like that? Not just your business, because if you're only ever getting income from one type, it doesn't matter whether you're in a corporate job or a business, you are at risk, because ultimately you're only getting it from one source.
Yeah, totally. Good answer. Okay, cool. And lastly, do you believe you can systemize your success, and why?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think, I'm always keen, systems don't fix bad processes. So I've seen people spend thousands of pounds on systems and they don't work. A bit like your Xero example. The amount of people that I see, people use Xero and QuickBooks and they just think, oh, because I've got the system, it works. Well, I probably see about 100 balance sheets a month, or the company do. 98% of them don't reconcile, with at least 10% risk on all of them. And that means that even though they've got a system, it means their bookkeeping process is wrong, because they're posting things to the wrong place. So the output will only ever be as good as the input. So systemizing it doesn't itself, I don't think, make the success. What makes the success is the process around that system. Because I see it all the time with bookkeeping. And the problem, I think, with most business owners is they don't really truly understand the balance sheet. Most people will get like a P&L and a tax number. But when we see valuations, I've seen valuations change by over 5 million, purely because people didn't understand one accounting principle that their accountant did. So, if you're not truly understanding your accounts, you're not really in a good position to move forward, because you don't know exactly if everything's reconciled and fully up to date.
Yeah, totally. Not to digress, but one of the things that I always recommend our clients do when they come to me and I help them to systemize their business. So first thing is, do you have a process that works? Yes. Okay, let's systemize it. If not, figure out how it works first. But the second thing is, when they talk about can you help me set up Xero or do my bookkeeper? I was like, just go and pay an accountant to do it. Pay a qualified bookkeeper. That is what they're there for. So that's what I've done for many, many years. And people often ask me, well, if you're so good at systemization, like, why don't you do all your bookkeeping in-house? It's because I'm not a professional bookkeeper. I'm not a professional accountant. I don't want to be. I want to do what I want to do. Anyway, so cool. Thank you so much, Julie. It's been a lot of fun talking to you today, and thank you very much for coming along.
No, thank you for having me.
My absolute pleasure.